Okay, so yep, you can probably guess what I'm going to be talking about in the title of my presentation. I guess Julian and Ingmar probably feel like they've sort of been transported into some philosopher's version of a Bruce Lee movie. But anyway, I am the next fighter, so you can deal with me. Okay, so basically, here's an account of bioenhancement, which I think I cribbed from you guys, but hopefully it's recognizable. I'm going to suggest that that's a bad idea, and not a bad idea for any particularly principled reasons. I think it's a bad idea for practical reasons. So when you consider the very interesting sort of practical agenda that emerged out of Julian's and Ingmar's book, the idea that we should pursue moral bioenhancement so that we could prevent this horrific event, basically human extinction, the end of worthwhile life, or something that would make worthwhile life forever impossible on this planet. I think it's a bad plan, sort of to pursue this, to seek to prevent ultimate harm by means of moral bioenhancement. So I have no objection, sort of no principled objection to moral enhancement. In fact, I'm pretty confident that it could happen and it can happen. And I don't think I'm particularly morally exemplary. I mean, my moral betters exist. And I suspect that maybe everyone in this room has people who are their moral betters. Now, it ought to be possible. There's no law of physics or of biology that says that there couldn't be measures, maybe in drug form, maybe some other form, that could basically make your moral psychology, not all of you, but sort of in a way the parts of your mind that make your moral decisions and basically control your moral behaviour more like them. So what am I going to say? A bad idea to pursue this by biomedical means. And it's because there's kind of a particular sort of structure of the potential payoffs. But if you think that moral bioenhancement is in principle achievable, then you say, well, yeah, it must be in principle possible to have a drug that would make you morally better. But I suspect, and I'm going to try and sort of demonstrate to you that basically one thing, the costs of failure are quite significant. So say if you're attempting cognitive enhancement and you have a drug that should make you as smart as Newton, and the drug doesn't quite work. Well, it sort of works okay, but it doesn't work perfectly. Well, then you end up slightly less smart than Newton, which is pretty good. So the costs of failure there, imperfect cognitive enhancement is not as good as perfect cognitive enhancement, but it's still pretty good. I suspect that imperfect moral enhancement is actually a way not of getting not quite as morally good as you otherwise have gotten, but it's a way of making you morally worse. So the costs of failure are being made morally worse, not being improved. Okay, so I guess the reason, they're going to make some assumptions here. The one assumption that I'm making is an assumption that I've taken from Ingmar and Julian. It's basically sort of an assumption about how moral enhancement or moral bioenhancement will work. It will work it's basically not going to work directly. There are going to be no injections or pills that could turn us into our moral superiors. It's going to work basically on moral sub-capacities. And Julian and Savulescu go into some detail of what some of these sub-capacities are. If you look at, it's probable, these are sort of plausible targets for biomedical agents to work on because they may be kind of localized in the brain. But it seems that there is sort of in a way moral decision-making, moral cognition. We try to sort of work out what are the right moral beliefs and work out what those moral beliefs imply. There are sort of the affective dimension of morality. It's likely to be differently located, worked on by different drugs. Sort of moral emotions, having appropriate moral emotions, and there's also sort of motivational sub-capacities. So you would be enhanced in terms of your motivation by if you became more likely to act on your moral conclusions. Okay, so basically moral bioenhancers are going probably to work by targeting those subcapacities. And I guess this is something that you've already heard about. I mean, how are these going to work? I mean, these are sort of candidate moral bioenhancers. They've got oxytocin boosting empathy, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, potentially boosting, I guess, sort of our sense of fairness and things like that, people's effect list and prisoner's dilemmas. But one thing that I'm quite sympathetic to Julian and Ingmar and other advocates of this view are is that basically this is moral bioenhancement 1.0. These are moral bioenhancers that we've acquired without even looking or trying to design moral bioenhancers. So, I mean, I think, basically being told that a cancer drug doesn't work perfectly isn't normally taken as reason to give up trying to find good cancer drugs. It's normally taken as, well, this is an okay cancer drug, let's get a better one. So I'm perfectly sort of open to the idea that, these moral bioenhancers won't work perfectly. And they may work adequately. I mean, they're moral bioenhancers that we found without even looking for moral bioenhancers. What will happen if we actually look for them? So I guess there's something about the way that they're likely to work which will make them bad even when they work better. So in order to see this, I guess there's sort of two ways to think about the results of moral bioenhancement. One way is sort of the way that appeals to philosophers, calling it the ethical theory account. I mean, it's what would appeal to most philosophers is the obvious way to assess sort of a drug that alters you morally, alters your moral responses. Basically, you make a decision. I guess this is something that Julian described. You decide what's the correct ethical theory. Maybe you're a consequentialist. Maybe you're a Kantian. Now, if that's the correct ethical theory, then an agent would enhance you if it made you more compliant with that correct moral view. If you conclude that moral Kantianism is correct, then you take your pill and you're improved if you violate the categorical imperative less frequently. Obviously, consequentialists will give a different account. So I want to suggest that that's the wrong way. That's a very dangerous way to think about moral bioenhancement, what it is that we should try to do. Here's an alternative, which I guess it's sort of going to sound somewhat old school. I'm calling it the normal humans account of moral enhancement. And it basically says this: don't measure success. I mean, think medically about moral enhancement. Don't measure success in terms of compliance with a moral theory that you happen to like, but think about what might be sort of normal moral capacity, human moral capacities. And basically, enhancement would occur when you make people, I mean, you have an account of moral normalcy. Now, moral normalcy is no great achievement. I suspect that every single person in this room is morally normal. I'm actually not paying you any great compliment when I say that. All I'm saying is basically that these subcapacities, your affective, your cognitive subcapacities, are working approximately as they were designed by natural selection to work. Who's abnormal? Who doesn't get a pass? Who doesn't count as morally normal? Well, this is sort of John Wayne Gacy, a kind of a famous mass-murdering psychopath. It's the first one I could think of. Clearly, I guess the way to think about him, he's not morally normal. I mean, his capacity for empathy is broken. So the normal human's account of moral enhancement would say, well, it's people like him who need moral bioenhancement. If there's a drug that will fix his empathy, then he's the right target for it. But for people like you, and I'm assuming that there are no hidden mass murderers here or psychopaths. You don't need it. I mean, I'm not saying that you're morally perfect, but you shouldn't be medicated. You can certainly be improved. Was Stalin morally normal? He was clearly a severely morally deficient human being. But to say that he's morally abnormal is to say that there's some part of his moral psychology that was effectively broken. And it's possible to act very badly, as he did, just by reasoning very badly and arriving at the wrong conclusions and acting on bad conclusions. How do these accounts come in? I guess I'd sort of use this example with you, Casey. We've seen Dexter. Dexter's basically a character on TV. He's a consequentialist psychopath. So he enjoys murdering people. I suspect he's a completely impossible way for a psychopath to be, but for some reason he cares about morality. He's a consequentialist. He wants to produce good consequences. And he produces good consequences by doing what he loves, which is murdering people. But he murders only other murderers. So the two accounts say very different things about what you should do to Dexter. According to the normal human's account, well, he's deficient in terms of his empathy. He needs moral bioenhancement. But I guess if you believe that consequentialism is the correct moral view, you might say, well, he's doing incredibly well. I mean, it should go the other way. We all need to become a bit more like Dexter and able to sort of, in a way, capitalize on opportunities to produce good consequences that he capitalizes on. So, why do I think that this, I mean, you might say, well, look, isn't this so obvious? I mean, basically this is the business of moral philosophy, is to work out what's the correct moral view. And I guess if moral philosophers work out what's the correct view, and then they basically go to talks like this and try to convince other people to believe as they do, and the success rate is pretty low. Because usually when a philosopher says that, sort of everyone just sort of, the natural disposition of other philosophers listening is to just disagree with you and argue against you. So it would seem that basically if you discovered and had good reasons to believe that a certain account of morality was the correct one, wouldn't it be great if there was some way that you could make people more compliant with that theory? I mean, wouldn't that be a moral enhancement? Wouldn't that be something very much worth having? Well, I suspect that it's not. And I guess the reasons that I think it's not are maybe somewhat subtle. So I suspect that sort of in a way it's no accident. This is not just a sort of a lazy appeal to normal capacities, sort of reject enhancement because I like people just the way they are, but a recognition of the fact that basically it's normal sort of moral dispositions and normal moral judgments which basically we philosophers use to work out what are the correct moral principles. And actually, more importantly, not only to work out what are the correct moral principles, and I'll give an example of this, but to do something that's much more complicated, but really crucial in moral philosophy. Once you've got sort of good moral principles, good moral ideas, how do you weigh them when they come into conflict? Which idea should you go with when they conflict? And that's a much trickier sort of set of judgments you've got to make. So I'll give an example of that. I mean, but basically, well, if you were writing moral philosophy papers, because it's great if you're a consequentialist, but if the audience whose intuitions are going to be relevant is Dexter and a whole lot of clones of Dexter, well, he starts the show for some reason convinced by consequentialism, but he's certainly not going to be worried about many of the things that concern opponents of consequentialism. When we test, if you hear an example in moral philosophy, some of the famous sort of counterexamples to consequentialism, and you say, well, what happens if you're wandering past a hospital and you're perfectly healthy, but someone then, just a marauding doctor, grabs you, kills you, harvests your organs, and saves 5 other people? Would that be a good thing to do? I guess most of us have the idea that there's something a bit wrong about that. I mean, we can see the good result. 5 people live instead of 1, which is pretty good. But we find that there's something problematic. Now, I guess, what would Dexter's reaction be to that? He's a fictional psychopath, but this is something he does in the show on a kind of a weekly basis. So, I mean, I suspect anyway, look, I'll give it some better examples, but I think that actually deficiencies are bad. So trying to work out what weight and what are the best moral principles in terms of sort of, you know, if you are deficient in normal moral capacities, is going to make it very difficult for you. And when you say, well, look, innocent people, I don't see it. What makes an innocent person, killing an innocent person wrong? Then, you know, your data is not valuable for the testing of moral, or is not particularly valuable for the testing of moral principles. But also excesses. Having an enhanced moral capacity can also make you a worse judge. So here you go. Here are 2 ideas. I'm not going to call them principles. Maybe for some people they're principles. But I suspect that these ideas, I'm not sure there's a lot of moral diversity in this room, but I think these ideas are things that people just tend to care about. I mean, you know, most people care about. If your moral theory doesn't find some way to reflect the importance of 1, then it's a bit of a problem for your view. Obviously, you can reflect, you know, for some views it's something like it's pretty fundamental. For other views, it's less fundamental, but it's there. And I guess moral idea too, parents should give special consideration to their children. You know, when consequentialists hear that because they endorse moral idea 1, that they're not supposed to care so much about that, their reaction isn't to say, thanks, that's fine. I mean, they generally do a pretty good job of saying, yes, we do care about idea number 2. It's just, for us, it's not fundamental. So they can certainly account for that. These are just 2 ideas, okay? So I guess one way you could be changed. I mean, say if you took a drug that led you to reject one of these ideas, that would be a big change. But I don't want to consider those kinds of cases. I want to consider ways in which we might sort of rank those, or we might calibrate those 2 ideas differently. So there are 2 cases. Both involve, I guess, gosh, this is a room full of philosophers, so you can't really be sure, can you? But I think both of them involve people doing things that I think are pretty morally appalling. Okay? And I want to say that both of the agents in these cases, in the story, in the first story and in the second story, involve people who accept those 2 ideas. So they're like us in accepting those 2 ideas. So you got a mother who breaks in, steals a dialysis machine. You know, she basically sells it on eBay so she can improve the education of her children. She will say, yeah, look, of course I'm a mother and I care about my child. That's very important. But of course I also recognise the importance. You know, you're telling me that people will die because of the loss of this dialysis machine. I think that's important too. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't steal the dialysis machine just to buy a new Xbox for my child. Education is important. And just when I rate who you feel empathy from, it's just a sort of simple fact that people who we know, she's never met the people in the hospital who need dialysis for her to empathise with. So if you increase the weight of empathy, then this is a possible outcome. Here's another case, and this looks like an objection to consequentialism from the bad old days of moral philosophy. Okay? This is the kind of thing that basically consequentialists spent the entire 1970s defending themselves against, the allegation that, you know, this is the way they have to behave. A father who happens to be a cancer researcher, it's a highly promising sort of cancer therapy. He tests it on his child. I can construct the story however I want, but basically this is the only opportunity he has to test it. I mean, it's going to be sort of a wonderful therapy which, if successful, will save lots of lives. Now, I guess there's a reason that's a crap objection against consequentialism, is that basically ought implies can is doing a massive amount of work there. I mean, consequentialism is not a theory that tells you to do things or attempt to do things that you know you wouldn't be able to do. So no one, unless you're Dexter, I guess in theory Dexter does have a child, but unless you are sort of a very unusual human being, you should not attempt to do. If someone tells you to do this, you shouldn't even attempt it. I mean, it won't work. You won't succeed. It'll have bad consequences. But what would happen if we gave you a drug that basically increased sort of the weight? How much time have I got here?
You've had 21 minutes.
Oh, cool. Okay. Increase the sort of the weight of either your sort of motivation, your moral motivation, your ability to act on conclusions, or your basically increased the sort of the resolution of your sort of moral decision making. So you become convinced. I mean, it seems that if you could do it, for fathers who can do this, obviously depending on the drug, if you could really do it, you could give your child a hugely dangerous therapy in the hope that it might be revealed as this wonderful wonder treatment for cancer, then you should. So basically strengthening your ability to act on this conclusion could lead to the conclusion. I mean, these are sort of not the recommendations of the normal human's account of moral enhancement. So how is this relevant to ultimate harm? So if we basically take those two examples, those are examples of people who have undergone moral enhancement. So one of their capacities has been enhanced. It's been strengthened. And the result seems to be decision-making that we recognise, we view as worse. Well, it seems to me that when we approach the problem of ultimate harm is actually not much of a problem, really. I mean, it's really a problem if you sort of basically, in combination with the constraining aspects of common sense, normal morality. I mean, solving the problem in a way that we recognise as morally acceptable, I mean, if you think, I'm thinking of the problem of climate change here, is really difficult. But basically, responding to the problem of climate change in a way that makes it the case that the human species won't go extinct is easy if you relax all of the moral constraints. So here are some suggestions. So if we enhance empathy. So I'm not going to get anyone to, we're going to take an agent, we're not going to enhance empathy, we're going to sort of retain these ideas. We recognise that everyone in the world, we recognise the importance of personhood and all of that. It's just that the weight that we place on people with whom we're socially bonded or connected is greater. Okay, so we're going to basically enhance that and work out how to approach, how to solve the problem of ultimate harm. Well, here's a suggestion. Trash Sub-Saharan Africa. That's a solution. You only really see them on TV. You don't know them. They're vulnerable. Incredibly vulnerable. I guess it's a case of, you might say, look, of course this is true. There are other people, they consume almost nothing. They're not contributing much to the problem, but they are contributing to the problem, basically just by being alive. And the fact that they're vulnerable means, well, that they're vulnerable. Try doing this to wealthy Americans. Try doing this to wealthy Americans. Get them to cut down on their consumption. And you're likely to find, A, that they're powerful, and B, I guess no one who drives through central Belgrade could be in doubt that they've got cruise missiles. They've got cruise missiles. People in sub-Saharan Africa tend not to be politically powerful and not to have cruise missiles. So there you go. That's a possible way out. Trash sub-Saharan Africa now. Enhance the power of moral reasoning. Well, here's a suggestion. I guess it seems to me that there are some ways out, some ways to get people to act more environmentally responsibly that people don't take very seriously. So, I don't know about supermarkets here, but in supermarkets in New Zealand, I don't know, the people who work, but they contribute to the burden that we place on the environment. But if you were to seriously consider, and I'm not sort of saying that this is the solution, but I doubt this is even seriously considered by people worried about the problem of climate change. If you could place a bomb in a supermarket, it's likely to have a substantial impact on supermarket profits. Now, these may be ways, if you were basically I guess one is going to appeal to people who are confident about their moral conclusions. One is going to appeal maybe to people who have enhanced empathy, and it's not that they don't care about people in sub-Saharan Africa, it's just that they care less. So when they do their moral balancing, they place less importance on them. It's a disaster that they must die. These seem to me to be bad solutions, but they're bad solutions that I guess I worry could arise through a process which basically strengthens some of our moral responses while leaving others untouched. So I guess basically, look, I mean, the upshot is, and this is where I get sort of slightly Star Wars-y, we've got to sort of have balance. So this is no in principle objection or rejection of moral enhancement. We've got this dramatically difficult problem of how to balance it. Now, you can enhance a runner by enhancing them in a balanced way. So if you strengthen the right leg, then you've got to make kind of a matching balanced strengthening of the left leg, otherwise it'll be a disaster. You need a balanced enhancement. You'll get someone who runs worse. You could certainly do it, so this is no in principle objection. You could certainly do it if you were enhancing morality, but it seems to me that there's this massive problem. And the massive problem is basically, it's quite clear what would be a balancing improvement, an improvement of your left limb that would be balanced with an improvement of your right limb. They're basically sort of mirror images of one another. That solution is not available here because the diverse components of morality, these moral sub-capacities, make vastly different kinds of contribution. So how do you find the way to enhance moral decision-making, moral reasoning, that matches a particular enhancement of moral emotions? I mean, it's not impossible to achieve a superior balance, but there you go. We know a way that works. We know a way that does tend to get the right answer, and it's the old-fashioned way. That when people engage in moral reasoning, moral discussion, moral education, they think about moral issues, it tends to happen in this balanced way. When you say something that strikes other people as wrong, they present a reason that might appeal to your moral emotions or to your moral reasonings, and you arrive at a position that's balanced.
10 minutes.
Cool, and I'll stop. But basically in a balanced way. So yeah, go with moral education, moral reasoning.
So I've got the same people as before, so I'll go for Chris because he hasn't asked a question, and then we'll go around. So.
Thanks, Nick. This is wondering, like, for this particular case, because you were saying that, something good about our normal moral...
Well, not so good, but just, yeah.
Yeah, well, so as Julian was saying, we all have these innate sort of racist sort of tendencies, and there's, a good evolutionary story for us. We have these, in the past, in small groups, we're very more homogenous. And you can also say that these tendencies do make the world sort of a worse place on multiple sort of views. So I was wondering what you think about trying to change those specific sort of racially biased tendencies. Do you think that this is something that, because it's normal, we should be complacent about it, it's part of a normal procedure, or do you think that that might be an exception where we should try to make that sort of change through biomedical means?
Okay, so I guess the kinds of cases, I guess what the examples that motivated my talk were sort of not those, but I will say something about that example. There were cases in which, like, we have to find new ways to interact with one another, new ways to sort of relate to one another to sort of solve the problem of climate change. But it seems to me, okay, so in the case of, I don't know, what the racist emotions that we supposedly all are victims of, well, I suppose there's a risky way. It seems to me that even if I, at some level, feel racist, it seems to me to be a safer strategy for me to actually just recognize that about myself. If I find myself, I don't know, not wanting to get into a taxi because the taxi driver could have a different skin color from myself, one strategy is to think about that and to basically sort of think about that in terms of moral principles. That's a way that works. That's a way that works. I don't think most of us, I guess the implicit association test shows that we're all deep implicit racists, but I don't know, when did you last commit your last racist assault? I mean, most of us, we respond to that by thinking about it.
Okay, you've got quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to go for the people who've asked the least questions, but I want to try and get them all in. So you've got about 8 questions at the moment on the line. So I think the lady here hasn't asked one.
Hello. Thank you very much for talking about ethical training, moral education. I teach a lot of business ethics.
Okay, I think I saw you smile for that one. So
sorry?
I saw you smile for that one. It looked like
and I argue with deans and beg with deans to let me do some ethics before we move on to business ethics. Not without often a great deal of luck. It doesn't mean I don't do it. But what I wanted to ask you is that when I work with students, and this is a very practical question, so excuse me, it's not particularly theoretical, but when I work with students in this region, everyone knows the social implosion here, the political implosion, the war, the sanctions, all these dreadful things that have gone on in the region, and I start to work with them on ethics and business ethics. What do you think is the quickest way to work with students in terms of moral enhancement? The most effective solutions to working with students who are coming to me without a great deal of training in societies that have broken down in this way for many decades. So do you have ideas how one uses materials and how one uses particular ethical issues? Are there issues which you would say are pivotal that students understand?
Well, I guess I've got my profession's biases, so I guess I do think that when people think about their reactions and think about, I guess if you're dealing with, I don't know, maybe expressions of ethnic hatred or whatever, those generally, I'm not saying they always don't, but as an educational strategy, they genuinely don't survive scrutiny. So when you think about, well, why do you hate this person? I admit they look different from you, but is that, I think that's an effective strategy. Now, I guess there could be, and I think there's some reason to think that there might be biomedical agents that suppress some of those feelings, but I would be inclined to go with the method that I think works and it has a long track. When people think about things, people aren't dumb, and some people may be dumb, but most people think about things and...
Okay, Peter, I think you haven't asked one yet.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about a possible implication of the normal human's account of moral bioenhancement as you described it. So there are some humans who seem to do remarkably altruistic things. For example, they donate kidneys to strangers. And let's assume that the facts are as described, that you have only a 1 in a couple of thousand chance of needing your second kidney, and that people who donate kidneys to strangers save at least 1 life, sometimes because of chain donations they save more than 1 life. But on the other hand, this is a very extreme thing to do. It's clearly beyond a normal understanding of how people behave, to check yourself into a hospital, have an organ removed and donate it to a stranger. So suppose that we discover that there is something biologically, physiologically, genetically, whatever, unusual about these people, that they have some gene that's functioning in a different way. And that we could turn that off, or we could provide people with a drug that counteract with it. Am I right in thinking that it follows on your account that that's what we ought to do, because this makes them more normal humans? And if so, that would seem to me troubling.
No, I mean, I guess I don't. I mean, I think I could. I have diabetes, so I could sort of, I understand, I feel I have a personal interest in the people who donate their kidneys. But it's certainly something, I guess so you look at sort of in a way the places you can go as a biologically or psychologically normal human being. And I guess if Stalin's one, you can clearly go way down. And I mean, I guess if you look at the genetic sort of contributors to our normal, I imagine there's going to be some variability, and I'm sure that there will be quite wide variation. But I guess I'd be more worried. I mean, I guess when I read the motivation of these people who give kidneys under these conditions, they give them to strangers, and maybe they give them across racial divides to achieve sort of another good effect, I find that I can understand them. And I guess I'd be more worried in a way if I said, well, it's a good effect, but I can't, why would you do that? Why would you give a kidney to a black person? Makes no sense. I mean, if I was really in that position, I can see that it's going to have these good kids, but I cannot understand. I feel I can understand that from the inside. So I guess I hope that normal humans can understand that. And that's a wide range.
Normalcy here needs more precision, right?
Yeah.
The concept of what is normal. Because I think a lot of people, when they hear about this case, just say that's not normal.
Well, it's unusual, yeah. But I guess if you I don't know, I mean, I guess but normal human bodies can run marathons, which I guess it's not, and they can even run ultra marathons. I guess I was trying to sort of delimit a range of cases where drugs would be the appropriate thing.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off.
Okay.
Just a few minutes, then I want to try. Ingemar, do you want to?
Well, just very briefly, but there seemed to me to be some self-satisfaction or smugness about the view that we seem to get a sort of, in normal situation, in more education, you get the right sort of superior values, or whatever you call it. I mean, here were the people you were thinking, presumably sort of liberal Democrats in the West. Because if you look at people, religious fundamentalists, if you look back historically, how people born up their children in the farm and so on, I mean, they would be likely to say from their perspective that we have the sort of right balance, and when we sort of educate our children and so on. And from the outside, we think they're completely wacky.
Well,
I think there's a very danger that we have the sort of in status quo, we have the right balance.
Well, to say that you're morally normal, and when I say that to you, I'm not paying you a great compliment. I'm saying that you're not a psychopath, and I guess I sort of, those
sort of how we do things.
That kind of those racist conclusions are one endpoint for morally normal people. But I mean, I guess I also loved the Pinker book, and it seems to me that that's. I mean, I guess I'm convinced by the arguments that we're not very different from the sort of pathologically violent forebears. So there's been a change to our moral views, which hasn't been sort of occasioned by any genetic change or anything like that.
Okay, Rob?
This strikes me as one of those arguments that's so powerful that it's got to be wrong.
Right, there you go. Can you stop there?
I guess the idea that medical interventions will lead to unbalanced enhancement, but moral education will lead to only a balanced change in our moral sub-capacities strikes me as radically implausible.
Oh, no,
I can kind of track which of my undergraduate students have done philosophy by asking them who's prepared to eat babies. It's only people who've done bioethics courses who think, given the right circumstances, orphan, child, no higher cortical function, strong desire, weak baby, yes I eat baby. I mean, it's pretty clear that actually what we think of as moral education actually is much more successful in changing some moral sub-capacities than others.
Yeah.
Which suggests that this is going to rule out moral education as well.
Well, don't have it done by the Nazis or anyone like that. I mean, there are plenty of moral educators.
much more successful at changing one set of intuitions than another.
Okay, one quick response. We'll have one more question.
Oh, okay, I've got a response. Yeah, I mean, I think moral education is quite powerful. It's also, I mean, there are plenty of historical contexts in which it's clearly led to very bad conclusions. So I guess it's not maybe smug or complacent or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just sort of, it's a baseline. And you can certainly, when you can end up joining the Nazi Party as a normal human, arrive at conclusions which are vastly morally deficient.
Okay, last brief question. Tom or Owen, which of you has a better question?
In harmony.
Okay, Owen, quick question.
Okay, just very quickly. So you say in the end that, yeah, this moral education is good for improving moral reasoning. So does that imply there are some biomedical enhancements that might be viable, specifically those biological or biomedical enhancements that improve reasoning, and the sort of reasoning in particular that you seem to think is so important, this kind of philosophical approach to things? If you could make people in the philosophy class or other contexts reason better about moral problems, then they should be better able to find this balance that you find important. If you think that this can occur in the classroom, there should be other biological interventions you could bring about that would improve.
I think being able to reason better does, in general, lead to better moral reasoning and superior moral conclusions in general.
So you'd be okay with those kinds of moral enhancements?
Well, I guess the kinds of cases that I was slightly worried about were cases in which you enhanced the power of those. I mean, I'm a consequentialist. So when I look at cases even like that, I know I've got kids. I mean, luckily I'm not a cancer researcher, but I feel the power of that conclusion that says this is just one. I mean, it's horrible to even think about. I mean, that's just how normal I am. But I mean, this is just one child. I mean, if I could test a drug that would save thousands of lives, how could I not do that? I mean, I guess I like to take refuge in the fact that I just bloody couldn't. Not even worth thinking about. In fact, I've almost made myself sick thinking about it now. So I like that sort of consequentialism. Consequentialism is a theory that's built for human beings. It's a great theory for humans. There are certainly better consequentialists.
Okay, sorry, we're going to have to cut you off. Thank you very much, Nick.
Okay.
And now it's time for our fearless leader.